Thank you, Richard, for that lovely introduction. It is an honor and a pleasure to be a keynote speaker again at a Polyglot conference, as I was 2 years ago in Novi Sad. And I appreciate Richard's inviting me here with the intention that I should give a motivational talk, a motivational and inspirational talk. That's my goal this afternoon. I feel like a life's calling as a teacher to take the benefit of my experience and put it out there for younger people who are starting off on the same path that I've tread, in the hopes that I can make that easier for them by giving them the benefits of that. But I feel a little bit nervous here this afternoon because the level of motivation and inspiration here is already so high. I'm not sure what I can add to that. And furthermore, as Richard pointed out, I'm sort of one of the grandfathers of this whole movement, and that was true at Novi Sad 2 years ago. We counted, and there were only 2 people who were older than me. And although I'm still in the senior citizens group here, I see a lot of people who are older than I am, and you have so much experience as well. I don't know what I can add to yours. And even among the young people here, I see so many people with so many flags on their badges already that I hope I don't bore you like an old man telling the same stories over and over again. So, at any rate, because my goal is to be motivational, perhaps some of the other older Americans in the audience can help me remember a good subtitle for my talk. In the course of our lifetimes, a number of books have been published, not as a series, but all with similar titles, like Everything I Ever Really Needed to Know, I Learned, and I think some of the titles were like, I Learned in Kindergarten, or I Learned from My Cat. The gist being that some basic fundamental experiences, like going to kindergarten, we may forget, but we learn very, very important lessons that if we reflect on them, they're a lot deeper than we thought. And giving and receiving unconditional love from a companion animal can also teach you many important lessons about life. So I think those titles are kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's not everything you need to know, so I'm going to put my tongue in my cheek if I can keep talking, and in the context of this gathering, give my talk this subtitle, Everything I Ever Really Need to Know, I Learned, Teaching Myself Languages with Assimil Methods. Obviously, that's not everything I need to know, but the reason I do have a lot of knowledge is because, and I'm going to talk about this in my talk, hopefully not like an old grandfather repeating the same stories, but I was privileged to have about a 5-year period of my life when I could immerse myself entirely in self-teaching manuals. And in the course of that, of course, primarily what I learned was languages, but I did learn, I think, many, many other valuable life's lessons that it's the goal of my talk to share with you. Because I think that even if I can't motivate you because you're already so motivated, maybe I can give you some justifications or validations for our passion that you might have thought of. Not that we need it among ourselves, not that we need it here in this Polyglot gathering, but don't forget, we're going to go home tomorrow to our loved ones and our friends and our families and our colleagues who probably don't really understand our passion, don't really understand why we're so excited about studying languages and want to know what's the point of it all. And so if we can say, you know, beyond language learning itself, you get a lot of other valuable lessons from studying language. That might be something we can use to sort of validate ourselves in front of them. Before I go on, I'm going to be making reference a couple of times in my talk to these terms here. Of course, there are millions of different methods and ways of learning languages, but I think there's a fundamental bifurcation between social learning and solitary learning. Social language learners, I think, are the majority in the general population, maybe even here in this group. Social learners are people who love languages, of course, but they love languages because they love people. They need to have other people that they can speak with. You're not going to learn a language if you don't know people that you can speak it with. That's your motivation. And you probably learn better by interacting with them and doing things with them. Whereas solitary learners are more, well, solitary, more scholarly perhaps sometimes, more introverted, and are happier sitting alone studying with books, and tend to learn languages just for the sake of languages themselves. They don't necessarily need to have people that they're going to speak them with. They're just curious about languages. I'm obviously a solitary learner in the main, but solitary loner, how about that? Is there another kind? But I think that these are like yin and yang, and each of them has to have a drop of the other in it, no matter how social you are, you do have to sit down at some point and study your grammar, and no matter how solitary you are, if you ever want to know if you really learned the language, you have to go out and speak it with people. So for you social learners, this might not resonate as much with you as with the solitary learners, but if you're a big white blob of yin social learning, perhaps we can be the little black dot of yang added to that. So I have to go over my background to justify who I am being here a little bit. So again, I hope this doesn't bore those of you who know it, but it's necessary to go over it, I think, with some different twists and different emphases than you might know it already, and I can't presume even that everybody knows who I am. So as a polyglot, who am I? I would define myself as somebody who has put off my dream of being a polyglot for far too long. I deferred my desire to become a polyglot for many, many years, and then when I finally got a chance to do it, it all came out with pent-up energy, and I did it with a real vengeance, letting everything go at it. I think that I knew when I was very young already that I was almost, more than I wanted to, I was just destined to be a polyglot because little boys take after their fathers, and my father's a polyglot. And I grew up in a home that was full of books in all sorts of languages, and we traveled a lot, and I saw him speaking languages in many different places. And most importantly, he gave me an excellent, outstanding example of systematic, disciplined, applied study. Every morning I'd see him sitting down and studying languages. But unfortunately, for whatever reason in my psychology, I didn't find that example to be so much inspiring as intimidating. And when I was younger, I wasn't really able to imitate that when I lived at home. It seemed like that was his preserve, and he didn't really try to force it upon me or get me to encourage me to do it. He didn't discourage me, but it really wasn't until I went to college that I really started getting serious about languages. And by the time I graduated, I double majored in French and German literature and studied a lot of older languages like Sanskrit and ancient Greek and Latin. And by that stage already, I knew definitely that studying languages was what I loved more than anything else. It's what I was better at doing than anything else, and it's what I wanted to do. So I didn't even think about any other option but continuing to study. And I looked for a graduate school where I thought I could learn the maximum number of languages. And that turned out not to be in a linguistics area, actually, but in a department of comparative history of religions where you were required to learn lots of languages in order to do the research. So I went there, and early on in my experience, my time there, I was getting to know my primary advisor, and I wanted him to know who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. So I told him, you know, I want to be a polyglot. And his reaction was to go, shh, don't say that. Don't say that. That's dangerous. Don't let anybody know that. Nobody will take you seriously. No, do never say that again. So this was very discouraging, to say the least. And with hindsight, I can't really explain why I didn't leave the program then, but it just seemed to me that that's the way it was, and I just felt I had to get a doctorate, and so I stayed on there. And I did learn, as I said, you had to learn languages for your research. I ended up writing my dissertation in Old Norse, on Old Norse, not in Old Norse. I'll take a sip of water every time I make a thinko. And I learned a lot of other medieval literary languages like Old French and Middle High German and a number of others. But what I really did was, having been by my advisor, I kept my passion secret, and I went around secretly sneaking into bookstores and buying as many manuals for the study of foreign languages as I could, and building a library that, Ellen, your library looked great, but it's little, okay? So you have a nice little library of learning materials. So I told myself, yeah, someday, this is what I really want to do with my life, and someday I'm going to do it. Not now. Someday I'm going to do it, okay? It seemed like maybe that someday came when I was given a postdoctoral research grant by the Berlin Program for Advanced German and European Studies, and I got to spend a couple of years in Europe, and I had a research project that I never really shelved, but as time went by, I spent more and more of my time and energy on languages. And this was a time period when I was actually a social learner for a while in the main. First and foremost, taking my German, which had been book German, and making it real living German, and being able to go to other countries like Sweden and Holland and Italy to do research. And while I was there, finding that with my comparative historical philological background and knowledge of modern languages, that yes, these cognate languages did sort of do the proverbial, I just picked them up when I went there. I did a little bit of grammatical study, and I would go there, and I just found that I could, I knew them already. So this was a fascinating experience, and it was lots of fun, but it was too easy. I felt like it wasn't a challenge, and I wanted to learn a really hard language, a totally different language, and so I hit upon Korean as my goal for that, and I got my first professorship at a university in Korea. In order to do that, I wanted to learn the language and the culture through it. And when I got there, I found that the university had a couple of quirks. For one thing, they had an ambiguous relationship with their foreign faculty. They wanted us there to teach, yes, and they would let us do research, but they didn't want or expect or allow us to do any of the other normal faculty things like that are very time-consuming, like serving on committees or having advisees or going to meetings and things like this. And also, this university was in the middle of nowhere. It was way out in the countryside. And so most of the foreign faculty members that came there didn't last very long. They either found it intolerable to be cut out of the decision-making process and something that involved them, or they just went stir-crazy from boredom. So these normal people left after a year. But I flourished there. I stayed there for almost 10 years because I turned around and I looked at it and I said, this is perfect. You're paying me for a full-time job, but I only have to work 12 hours a week and everything else is up to me. And look at this, it's beautiful. My house is on the top of a mountain, it's in the forest. I can see trees all around and then rice fields and beyond that, the ocean. This is great. I've been saying almost 10 years now, someday I'm gonna make myself a polyglot. Well, that was someday. So I took that opportunity to take out all my, not just Assimil, but Linguaphone and all my other manuals, and to just go at them with a vengeance, and developed a very rigorous study regimen of about 12 hours a day, each and every single day, just sometimes studying dozens or even scores of languages at a time in the most sort of relentless fashion. And it was great. I loved it. It was the best time of my life, beat even Germany. But this lasted for about 5 years, and it just sort of came to a natural end. That was a stage of my growth, I think, because at the end of that 5-year period, I realized, well, even with all this time, I just can't really juggle any more languages. As a matter of fact, I've learned too many. I need to cut back, and the next stage will be finding the languages I really want to take to higher levels to go with and master. So it just sort of came to a natural stage phase of my learning experience. And also life intruded on me. Rather than being well, it was kind of like a hermitage, a little mountain shrine, a monastic place up there that I had on my mountaintop. And then one day this lovely lady burst in and said, I'm going to be your wife. And she got her will, and then she became the mother of first one son and another son. And so I said, okay, well, it's time to move on to other challenges now, like, well, Arabic. How about I go for that? So let's move to other places and spend more time on husbandhood and fatherhood, and now I'm in other institutions where I do have to do these time-consuming normal faculty things, and so there I am. That's how I turned it off. That's how I moved on. So, as my title said, what I felt like I was doing when I was learning all these languages is not just languages. I was learning languages principally, of course, but I was learning lots of other things. I really felt like I was doing mental exercise in that intensive fashion. It was very much a monastic practice, and I'm not using this term lightly. Before going to Korea, in the past I had spent a number of times, I went to do retreats in Benedictine Catholic monasteries, and while I was in Korea, I did a number of retreats in Buddhist monasteries, and so I found that when I went to these places for a handful of days, it was usually less than a week, but 4 or 5 days, that it wasn't very different from my lifestyle, getting up at 3 in the morning, getting straight to work in a disciplined fashion, and having a regimented routine of things that you were following. So it was quite similar. If I had that faith, I could easily have just rolled over and stayed there. But I turned it off again, okay? Some of the things that they did, particularly in the Buddhist monasteries, were also some specific exercises, like breathing and concentration exercises. I assume most people know what they are, but I'll just say briefly for those who don't. Breathing is such an automatic process that we have to do all the time or die. But in this sort of mental exercise, you use your lungs, but it's controlled by the mind. This is a set of exercises where you count your breaths in, count your breaths out, try to hold it, and do it in different patterns. So you make an unconscious process conscious, and concentration exercises are the opposite. This is like the forerunner to meditation, when you try to empty your mind of any thoughts, any images, any words, and yet remain completely conscious, not fall asleep. So these are real exercises. If you try to do them, the first times you try to do them, you will only be able to do them for a few seconds. But the more you practice, the better you can do it. And when you meet somebody who's really good at these, you can see, you can feel that they have mental toughness. You can see that they're mentally fit the same way when you meet somebody who works out a lot. You can see that he or she has a really nice toned body, even if it's under their clothes and you can't really see it. So I think that these exercises mean that mental exercise really is a form of exercise. It might be figurative. I can still make an analogy, but there's another reason to think that it's literal. It's been touched on in a number of other talks here yesterday in the main, and that is the supposed link, or not link, disassociation between language and Alzheimer's disease. And the sort of urban myth version of it is that learning languages prevents Alzheimer's. That's not right. That's not what the research says. The research is done on thousands of people who do have Alzheimer's and other degenerative mental dementia type conditions. And what the research says is that people who, even though they have it, people who know multiple languages are able to, it doesn't cure it, it doesn't prevent it, but it enables them to compensate. If you have multiple languages, even though your brain is degenerating, you will be able to continue functioning for 4 or 5 years after you would not be able to do so if you were monolingual. And the actual language that's used in these scientific sort of neurological studies, they do talk about this being due to the mental workout that is involved, the exercise that is involved in shifting between different languages. So that seems to be some further indication that it's a real form of exercise. So I was very happy yesterday to attend a talk about la gamification des langues. I'm sorry, I forget the names of the presenters, but that was very interesting, because if exercise, mental exercise is real exercise, then you can give yourself some rules to it. You can play, you can treat it like a game, you can treat it like a sport, and develop properly. It's very important to develop properly when you train anything. When you're doing physical training for athleticism, okay, you need to know the right techniques, and you need to have a system for progressing from one style or one type of exercise to the other one, or else, okay, you will, for example, if you start doing kettlebells too much, too fast, and you lift your arm up too much, you will find you have pinched a nerve, and you'll get injured and hurt. And this actually gives me the opportunity to have a genuine prop on stage when I give this, but it's not worth it. Getting hurt is not what you want to have happen, okay? You don't want to get hurt when you exercise. If you don't know the proper technique and progression, though, you will get hurt, or if you don't get hurt, you're going to burn out soon, okay? You're going to make a New Year's resolution to take up running, and you may keep it up for a week or a month, but you'll burn out. And even if you don't burn out, if you continue doing, you're likely to come to a point of stasis very soon. You're likely to come to a point when you say, hey, I was making good progress earlier, but I'm not making progress anymore. I'm sort of stuck in a rut. I have found a comfort zone, and I don't know how to break out of it. And if you continue working, even under these circumstances, you'll find that you come to a sort of form of lopsided development. For instance, if the only form of exercise you do for about 20 years of your life is long distance running, like somebody that I know, you'll find that you develop a great deal of endurance. You can run for hours, but you don't have any strength. You don't have any musculature. That's not ideal. You don't want to have that happen. And all of these things have parallels in mental discipline, in sort of training for polyglottery. Okay? You also need to know techniques and procedures because, well, thank goodness I don't have a wrist brace for my brain to show you, because I don't think you can injure yourself, okay? But you can certainly burn out, and you can certainly find stasis, come to a plateau where you're not able to progress anymore, and you can certainly come to a form of lopsided development, whether this is inside one language where you wanted to have good holistic progress and you find you have some skills that are really lagging behind other skills, or as polyglots we generally have goals of different types of languages, different areas of languages that we want to learn, and we might find that, well, we're making good progress in some, but not in others. In that regard, talking about training and lopsided development, if there were not another presentation today, another one right after this that I'm very much looking forward to, I would spend more time on this topic, diachronic training. I've had many, many conversations with other polyglots where people say things like, I want to learn all the languages in this language family, or I want to learn one language from each language family, or I want to learn one language from each cultural circle or each continent, or one language of each grammatical type. I want to learn an agglutinating language. I want to learn a tonal language. But it's very rare in these conversations that people say, I want to learn a language from each era. I want to learn a language from each time period. I want to learn a language from 5,000 years ago, from 4,000 years ago, from 500 years ago. And I always just say, why not? So much of my background and training was in older and medieval languages. So I hope that Jean-Pierre Guillermo, I think is the name of the author of the ancient Greek and ancient Egyptian books. We'll talk more about this shortly, about the fact that it really does use a different set of mental muscles. And so if you want good development, you need to practice all your muscles. It's important to do that. This may be a harder sell for the social learners, but we can point out that if you know comparative historical languages, it really is a good aid. It can help you learn modern languages a great deal, so that might be a selling point for those. For solitary learners, though, that's an easier sell. Solitary learners like to sit alone with their books anyway, and so we always want to learn about culture through languages. Well, why just learn about a culture as it is now? Why not learn about how it got that way? Why not see it in its own records? Why not understand it through the ages? This is a great joy of language learning, and this can be done primarily through literature. Okay? This is something that I feel strongly about, and I won't take more time talking about this now, but to me the study of languages and literature is indissolubly linked, and all too often in conversations you just talk about the languages but not the literature. They should go hand in hand. Back to other forms of mental training for polyglots, and again, I know that there are many people out there who have never had a hermitage on a hilltop in Korea. You have different forms of practice, but for me it was that very monastic type of existence that I led doing this, where I developed great amounts of discipline and treated the whole thing as a real form of spiritual exercise. What do you need? What's required? What do you have to do? The first thing that I had to do to really switch into that, to realize, hey, now's the day, now's the time, I can stop putting it off, was to realize that this was a real lifestyle commitment. This is something we ought not to forget, particularly younger people who might be watching videos of polyglots who do speak umpteen languages, and it might seem like they do it effortlessly, but there's always thousands of hours that have gone into that. And so you have to really live a lifestyle devoted to that, and you can only do that if you really love the material. So that's the first requirement. The second requirement is learning how, and once you make that commitment, it generally takes care of itself. How to prioritize your time, how to devote time to that, how to be able to make time, and then that time will grow as you make more progress. Another very important aspect of the lifestyle that I led then, when I made myself really the polyglot who I am, is that it was crucial that it be done on in a systematic and really consistent basis. Okay, that's a sine qua non. You have to do that because what are you doing, or what was I doing? You were I'll be the first to confess. I have, and I'd like to invite you to confess with me. Do you have any sort of obsessive compulsive tendencies? I think it's probably kind of common in our community. Yes, I'm not the only one. So it's quite possible to waste a lot of time organizing the paper clips in their box and dusting things off. It's not productive. But if you can take, behaviors, okay, and train these behaviors productively, if you can use your obsessive compulsive traits, let's call them traits, not a disorder, traits. If you can use these things productively to take sets of behavior and train them, okay, specific kinds of studying, I'm notorious for something called shadowing and scriptorium, take specific kinds of things and really train them, drill them until they become an exercise. What you'll end up doing is creating a context, both a physical context, a temporal context, and a mental context, for taking these traits, turning them into behaviors, sets of behaviors, making them habits. Habits that you're going to drill and drill and drill until they get to the point of automaticity, because they bring you the results that you need, okay? They help you do the hardcore learning that you really want to do. So that is a switch that I made at this point. I will talk about a distinction that I felt I was transitioning in that time period when I moved, when I finally made the commitment. And I moved from being what I called an amateur polyglot to a professional polyglot. And there was a very different set of habits that I developed and a very different mindset that I had. When I'm describing an amateur polyglot here, I'm describing myself all the way through graduate school, by which time I had studied a dozen languages and was a polyglot by most standards, but I was not by my own standards, because the main characteristic of myself when I was an amateur polyglot is I would say I was a would-be polyglot. I wanted to be a polyglot. I was waiting to be a polyglot. All these other languages I wanted to study, but I was just putting it off. I wasn't letting myself do it. A second characteristic that I had was that instead of studying, I was just all the time preparing, all the time planning, almost in an addictive fashion, drawing up time charts that I planned to keep in the future, buying more and more books and thinking, okay, when I get these books, then I'll finally be able to go and do the studying that I want to do. And so just forever, ever planning and preparing. And occasionally, okay, I would, though, just sort of impulsively plunge into a language and do something with it for a while. And then I would stop. Okay, this was even into my European period, Okay, here I have an invitation to go give a lecture in Sweden. I'll study some Swedish. Oh, here I am. Hey, I can kind of understand this. Let me try to talk. Hey, they can kind of understand me. I'm going to do more and more of this. This is fun. Oh, my 3 weeks there are over. I'm back in Germany. Oh, no more Swedish for a while. That was sort of the way that I would study. And the main thing, big difference I really felt, and there's nothing wrong with any of these things. There's nothing wrong with focusing on goals. But when I had that sort of hobbyist polyglot, would-be polyglot mindset, I was always focused on thinking things like, well, I want to get my Latin really good before I go to Italian. I want to learn all 1,800 Chinese characters that Koreans have to memorize. I want to do this by December. I want to get to B2 in this language by this time next year. So I was always thinking things like that. Whereas once I sort of became a professional polyglot, I would call it, I developed a different set of habits and mindsets. Instead of saying I would be or I want to be, I just did it, okay? No excuses, ever, every single day. Just do it, okay? Instead of always planning and preparing, okay, you would be doing it in a systematic fashion, the most efficient fashion, the most effective fashion that you were capable of. And instead of starting and stopping, plunging in impulsively, doing something for a while, and then stopping and doing something else, you would just sort of almost effortlessly move on ahead, make your own path, progress forward. So, and again, the big shift is rather than focusing on the specific goals that I had, I just focused on turning off my presentation thing. Just focused on the work itself, focused on the procedure, focused on doing what needed to be done. That was it. I wasn't thinking about getting to the point. I was just in the point. I was just being a polyglot studying. So, the work of a professional polyglot. A title. You know where I'm going with this, but imagine that in another context. What if this were a job announcement or a job description? Maybe someday you can say, I'm a polyglot, here, hire me for that. Unfortunately, that's not yet. I'm just talking about in the sense here of somebody who's made that lifestyle commitment to being a polyglot. And the main thing, as I said before, is you just have to show up and do the work. You just have to sit down and study. Or if you're going to be shadowing like I did, you can walk around and study. But the most important thing is that you just come there and you do it. You get it done. That's actually much harder to do than studying itself. For normal people, studying languages can be boring, tedious drudgery, but for those of us who love them, it isn't. We don't have problems with that, but some people think language learning is hard because they get distracted. You're not going to have a problem with that. And some people think, well, yeah, there are some hard, difficult aspects of some languages, but those aren't hard for us, are they? That hard for us means interesting. Hard for us means requiring more work, but being more rewarding in the end. No, I would say that there's nothing hard about studying languages, but it is hard to get yourself to the point when you just can show up every single day and do the work, which is inquired. So here it is. Again, it has to become a consistent practice with no excuses and no days off. You show up, you sit down or walk around or whatever you're going to do, and you do it each and every single day. That's what I considered necessary to make myself really a professional polyglot in this sense. How do you do that? What can you do to make yourself do that? You have to identify with the entire procedure, the entire process. You have to become like, well, here's a cat. I pick up my cat and I stroke him and he'll purr. Why is he purring? Well, he's purring because he's happy right now, he's content, I'm stroking him. These are the proximate causes, but ultimately he's purring because he's a cat, and that's what cats do, cats purr. There's a dog, he's barking at me. Why are dogs barking at me all the time? They're vicious, they're aggressive, maybe I scared him, he's defensive, he smells something I don't smell. Those are proximate causes, but he's barking because he's a dog. Dogs bark. Look, there's a polyglot. She's studying Persian. Why is she studying Persian? Well, maybe she already studied Urdu and Arabic and wants to see how many, cognate words there are. Maybe she wants to read the Shahnameh in the original. Maybe she knows somebody in Tehran that she wants to go visit. But ultimately, she's studying Persian because that's what polyglots do. They study languages. You have to identify with the entire procedure this way, sort of make yourself one with it. And again, you need to, as you make that shift, you're not going to focus on those goals, getting to B2, learning all 1,800 characters. You're going to get to B2. You're going to learn all 1,800 characters, but you focus instead on the process itself. And this learning all 1,800 characters or getting to B2, that's a result. That's just a byproduct of the fact that you sit down and you study every day. As I said, to summarize, you're focusing on the process itself. That's the crucial thing. It's hard to do that, though. How do you focus on the process? How do you sit down and do the work every day? We face resistance, different kinds of resistance. There's external resistance, which is actually not so bad. External resistance, you can meet it in the form of graduate school advisors who tell you, no, it's not worthwhile studying to be a polyglot. Don't let anybody know you want that. They'll think you're being a dilettante. External resistance can come in the form of doubters out there, the entire community of applied linguists who say that it's not possible to learn several languages well, you can only learn a few. And the most dangerous form of external resistance, the most valid one, true one, is just in terms of other obligations, things that you have to do for your job, for your family, okay, that really prevent you from sitting down and doing the work that you need to do if you want to take up this sort of lifestyle. Much harder are internal forms of resistance. Internal forms of resistance take several different types as well. There is self-defeating kind of doubting feelings. Well, he learned so many languages. Can I do that? Okay, I'm not sure I can master that. Those Chinese characters are really hard. I don't think I can learn those. This kind of doubting things, you can hear yourself doubting. You can hear yourself saying these things. It's similar to what I would call sort of irrational fears, but these are different. You can't hear yourself fearing for the most part. You need your wife to tell you that, or some analyst, or somebody who knows you really well to say, hey, look, you know, why you're not doing this? It's not you're articulating your doubts. No, you're quaking in your boots. You're really shivering because you want to do this more than anything else, but you haven't done it for so many years, and you're comfortable not doing it. And if you were to do it, you have to make some real commitments. You have to burn your bridges behind you. You can't go back, and you just have to go forward into unknown territory. You don't know what's out there, and that's pretty scary. So it's easier to stay in your comfort zone. It's easier to keep putting it off for another time, okay? So this is a very real form of irrational fear that will hold you back from taking a plunge to do something you really want to do. And the way it will manifest itself is usually not you're trembling and shaking, you'll just procrastinate. Okay? You can procrastinate. I'm sure we all know the many different ways. You can sit down to work and then notice that there's dust on your book and get up and dust everything off, and you'll study when you're done dusting, or you'll tell yourself, I'll do it tomorrow, 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 and it never comes, okay? So you need to overcome resistance, and you can do that. Okay, the first step is you have to recognize that it's there. Recognize that this urge to dust, this listen, it doesn't matter that somebody's saying, oh, you can't learn 15 languages. You don't care what that person says. You have to recognize that this is a form of something trying to hold you back, and you have to face up to it. You have to look at it and say, no, I'm not going to give in to this. I've made this commitment to be relentless in my study habits, and I'm going to follow through with it. And the more you practice that, the better you'll get at it. That's all there is to it. Why do we have this resistance? We have resistance. This slide is going to be kind of new agey, and the only apology I can make for that is a very bad one, that this isn't very original, what I'm saying here. If you're interested in the whole idea of resistance and overcoming resistance, I encourage you to look at the work of an author named Stephen Pressfield, in particular his book, The War of Art. He is really the person who knows most about this, and I'm just sort of paraphrasing his ideas here and applying them to the area of language learning, becoming a polyglot. But it's applicable to any real calling in life, because he says the reason we face resistance, it's just, that's the way it is, unfortunately. We human beings have a very hard time developing good habits and all too easy time developing bad habits. And any time that you really want to do something, you can imagine it as, you know, a real entity. It manifests itself, but it's going to cast a shadow on the other side of the light, and that shadow is its negative reflection, and that shadow is an active force that's going to try to throw up these forms of resistance in your path and prevent you from doing what you say and feel in your heart you really want to do. He also says that, in point of fact, the more resistance you feel, the more important it is that you do something. The harder you have to overcome something, you have an authentic self, basically, inside yourself that's got a real vocation to do something, and that is going to throw up the most resistance in your path. So the harder something is for you to do, the more you need to do it. Unfortunately, though, what do? We take the path of less resistance most of the time. I want to move forward right now, and this is really hard, but this is not so hard, so naturally I'm going to go this way. And he says, though, that these paths of least resistance might seem to us like we're pursuing our goals, we're pursuing our dreams at the time, but they're not our real paths. They're what he calls shadow paths, surrogate paths, substitute paths. An example from my life, again, with hindsight, I would never say that earning a PhD from the University of Chicago is an easy thing to do. The department I was in had a very high attrition rate. Most people who started didn't finish. It wasn't easy. But compared to that, compare that to living all by yourself in the woods in a foreign country, having to generate all your own energy, getting no feedback, getting no validation from what you're doing, and sustaining that for a period of years. That's much harder, much, much harder than going through a program that has steps and structures and deadlines and accountability and somebody that you have to answer to, and a community of other people who are engaged in the same basic proceedings, and a library of resources for all the things that you need to do, and just basically some sort of feeling of social valuation of what you're doing. That is much easier. So for me in my life, looking back, I would say that staying in that program after I've been told I can't pursue my dream of being a polyglot was a form of path of less resistance. I finally overcame that, though. I'm glad that I did, as I said, because I feel like I learned many, many valuable skills not just languages, in that intensive studying period. These are skills that I've been able to transfer or use in other walks of life. Again, as an analogy, when you do physical exercise, you may take up running because you go to the doctor and he says you're overweight and your blood pressure is high and you need to lower your cholesterol, so take up running, and you do it for that. And you get a bit more fit, but you also discover, hey, you know, I used to be stressed out all the time, and now when I go for a run, I feel calmer. I used to have a hard time sleeping, now I sleep really well. I used to get tired easily, now I've got a lot of stamina. I've got more confidence. I feel better about myself, because I go for a nice long run, and after 45 minutes, I get my runner's high, I get my dopamine. So there's a lot of things that you get besides health from physical exercise. Likewise, from mental exercise, well, in the case of this talk, from intensive polyglot studying, okay, you don't just learn languages. Obviously, that's what you learn first and foremost. You also learn, really, how to be systematically applied to whatever you want to do. You learn how to develop disciplined habits. You spend so much time with your own mind and how it learns, you become very self-aware. You self-reflective. You develop pride in a good sense, that is satisfaction in what you've achieved. You become very confident of your abilities to continue learning. And so the big transferable skill, the big benefit, I would say, is that I think autodidactic abilities are very transferable. If you have trained yourself to do something like sit down and do the work all day, every day for one pursuit, such as learning languages, you're certainly going to be able to do the same thing for another form of pursuit. It might be another artistic pursuit or intellectual pursuit, creative pursuit. I'll give a specific example from my own life that also illustrates the fact that although we might know some things on some levels, there are things that come back and bite us again, even though we thought we became aware of them. Does anybody know what this stands for? Yeah, National Novel Writing Month. They need to change the name because it's an international sort of challenge that goes out every November. For people who are maybe amateur writers, in the sense that I talked about amateur polyglots, people who want to be writers and have saying, someday I'm going to sit down and write a novel, but just never get around to do it. So it's sort of a community effort. In the month of November, you commit yourself to writing 50,000 words in the course of the month. That's 1,666 words each and every day. And there's a supportive community to do this. There are forums to talk about it and get advice. You can go to write-ups if other people in the area are doing it. You have writing buddies. It's a very supportive network of people who really want to do something and haven't been doing it and are trying to use this sort of as a jump start to get doing it. And despite that supportive network, it also doesn't have a very high success rate. Only about 17% of the people who commit to doing this each year ultimately end up succeeding at it. So maybe 1 in 5 or 1 in 6 people. So again, this is an example from my own life about becoming aware. And in this, I have to say, for me, actually maybe becoming a polyglot was a shadow path. Because I actually have more resistance to being a creative writer, a creative author. I love literature, and I'd love to create a piece of literature, and that's what I've told myself all my life, but I've been really afraid to do it, and I've never done it. Until 2 years ago, maybe exactly 2 years ago, right when I went back to Dubai from Novi Sad, it hit me, ooh, this NaNoWriMo thing is starting in 2 days. Maybe I should do it this year. And no sooner did I think that, than something inside me said, no, 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 you can't do that. You haven't done any preparation. You can do it next year. And something else said back to that voice, the hell with you. I'm 50 years old now. I put this off for half a century. What, am I going to put it off for another half a century? No, I'm going to do this, okay? So this required, instead of getting up and sitting down at the crack of dawn and studying languages for a couple of hours, this required getting up, sitting down at the crack of dawn, and writing for a couple of hours. Do you think I had any difficulty doing that? Do you think I wrote 50,000 words that month? No, I didn't write 50,000 words that month. I wrote more like 250,000 words. And the next year I did sort of the same thing. It wasn't hard. Having done that, okay, having had that discipline, all the skills that I needed went over. I really need to work on my creativity, on my storyline, on my characters, all the things that are necessary in making a good novel, a good work of literature. So I'm going to do this again in 2 days. And in an audience of 400 people, there must be somebody out there that might like to do that too. Why don't we do it together? Let's be writing buddies. Come talk to me, and I'll give you the benefit of my experience, having done it twice before. And you can hold me back. Remind me, don't write so much. Concentrate on quality rather than quantity. I'll tell you a little secret. I won't tell you all of it, but my story is kind of about polyglots. There's some polyglots in the story, and maybe you would want to write something too. Okay. I'm coming to my conclusions, and conclusions for motivational talks are always kind of the same, because there are really only a few basic truths out there that we probably all know, but for some reason it's just really hard to act on them. It's really hard to remember them. And the first one, I just gave a perfect example. It took me really 30 years to get going as a polyglot. It took me 50 years to even start being a writer, to follow my dreams. Learn from my mistakes. Don't do that if you're younger. Do not defer your dreams. If you have something that you really want to do, don't say, I'm going to do it someday. Just get started today. Why should we always forget that we're mortal? I mean, the roof could fall in an earthquake right now. Okay, it didn't, but we all have to walk home, and there are axe murderers out there. You could run into an axe murderer. And if that doesn't happen, you have to fly home tomorrow. Your airplane could crash, okay? You might not have it tomorrow. If you really want to do something, do it now. And in the context of this, I know there are many professional polyglots out there, but there are some amateurs. If you're an amateur polyglot who fits my description of being a want-to-be polyglot, then just do it now. To become a professional polyglot, what you need to do is change your mindset. That's the first step. You can do that just by changing your mindset, and then your habits will start to follow after that. When you change your mindset, you're going to find it easier to overcome that resistance. You overcome the resistance by looking for some inner direction, internal guidance, rather than, again, looking out and counting those goals, okay, for external validation. You can approach polyglotry as a sport, as athleticism, mental exercise, mental discipline that has rules and sets of things that you need to follow in order to do them. And playing games, playing sports is usually fun, isn't it? So it's fun, and it's fulfilling, and it gives you happiness. And there's many things out there in the world that can make you happy, but take it from me, there's nothing better. The most fun thing in the world is autodidactic language learning. So if you want to have fun, do it, okay? That's all I have to say. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. We've got about 8 or so minutes for questions, so let's hear from the audience.
Yeah, I was really interested to hear you say that you knew you were going to be a polyglot, and your father was one. What about your kids? Are they following in their dad's footsteps?
Yes, they are. I love my father very much. We have a great relationship now. We're polyglot friends. We do talk about it now, but as I said, he never encouraged me or forced me to do it, and I'm not that kind of father. I speak French all the time with my sons. I'm teaching them Latin, German, Spanish, Russian, and a couple of other languages. So yeah, they're having a different experience.
Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. I was wondering specifically about the resistance. There are some people, and I'm not sure if anybody else is familiar with this, but I suffer from mental diseases such as anxiety and depression. And then at that point, the resistance starts to build up, and it starts to become an unbreakable hurdle. What advice, as someone as proficient as yourself, have for people like me who suffer from this kind of problem to overcome that and then move on to greater and glorious pastures?
Oh, I'm sorry, this kind of thing, if we might, need to have a preface. I'm not a doctor or a psychologist. I'm not qualified to give real advice. If you're truly mentally ill and you have depression issues, that is different from the kind of anxiety and irrational fear that I was talking about. But so if you can try some of the same things, you might find perhaps that we live in a society where we love to diagnose people and prescribe medications, and I do question whether many people who are diagnosed with things are truly ill. One could be, and in that case I really don't know what to say, but it's also possible that the source of your unhappiness or frustration might be the fact that you're blocking what you really want to do. So you might just try to do the same thing. If it doesn't work, then go see your doctor, like I had to go see a doctor about this. I'm sorry I can't give a better answer for that.
My question is, when do you know when you're actually burnt out? I remember I went to Malta for a week, and I had to get my Ankies done for the day. And I came back from Malta, like I went to the most beautiful places, but I came back actually drained. So what would you say about actually reaching the goals, but also staying healthy?
Reaching your goals, but also staying healthy. If you're burning out, that's not a good thing. Again, you're not using the, you're not using the right techniques. You're not using the right procedure. You need to take a different look at the way that you study. As I said, there's nothing at all wrong with focusing on goals, but rather than focusing on goals, if you focus on the procedure and the process and become a bit more cognizant of what really works in your learning style, and you get better knowledge of the techniques and sort of procedure for progressing that you should be using, I would think that you would not burn out, and you would still achieve those goals.
Hello, I'm here on the left, bottom left. As someone who follows a kind of monastic sort of discipline, I'm very curious what your attitudes are towards the internet. Is the internet for you a tool, or is it a trap in your daily study regime?
A trap.
How so? I'd like to hear how you deal with the internet. Do you have it? Do you not use it? Do you limit it to certain times and so forth?
Richard, help. Tech support, tech support.
I can confirm he's a great polyglot, but a complete technophobe.
I do the best I can, but seriously, one question I get asked is, I seem to have withdrawn a little bit from the polyglot community. I don't do that on purpose, but I just did come to a decision that technology was moving forward too fast, taking too much of my time, too much of my energy, and I didn't want to do that, so I sort of stepped back from using it a little bit, and as I stepped back, it continued progressing more and more and more. So Richard has to put in my USBs for me and put the hotel key in. That's kind of complicated, yeah.
So you mentioned that the main focus you had before was basically secluded type of study. You would spend time with your books and doing your thing. And for the longest time, I had the same approach. And the problem that I realized that I started to face was that when came the chance to actually speak, I could have the words in my mind. I understood what people were saying, but I could not reproduce the language. How did you break that barrier?
I didn't face that. I didn't have that barrier. Maybe it's the way that I studied. I would listen to, working with, again, Assimil type books that have audio recordings with it. I always practiced speaking it aloud to a large degree, and I just really didn't have that problem. I mean, when I was still in Korea, I wanted to get my Russian up, so I went, after I got good enough, I went to Russia and stayed with the family and just practiced speaking. And while I was there too, I taught myself Arabic, and then when I went to Lebanon, I was, surrounded by it and able to speak it. So I'm sorry, I just didn't have that problem. I think it might go back to, you need to, as you're learning and studying, even in seclusion, you need to do more speaking practice and listening practice.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. I know Alexander will be available if you've got any questions specifically for him. join me in thanking him for his time and for his great insight. Thank you.